I'm Emily Chang in San Francisco, and this is Bloomberg Technology. Coming up in the next hour, Lyft boosts the price of its IPO. The ride-hailing company is scheduled to list at the end of the week, and it looks like demand is strong. Pichai and the president. The Google CEO meets with Trump, facing tough questions about Google's censorship and relationship with the Chinese military and accusations of silencing conservative voices. We will get the latest. Plus, Facebook attempting to curb racism on its platforms, how the social network is cracking down on white nationalism and hate speech. But first, to our top story, ride-sharing company Lyft has boosted the price range for its upcoming IPO. Lyft says it'll offer 30.77 million shares at $70 to $72 a piece. That is up from the $62 to $68 per share in its original filing. The company aiming to raise as much as $2.2 billion. Joining us to discuss, who else but Bloomberg Tech's Eric Newcomer in New York. So, Eric, I assume this suggests demand was strong.
Yeah, we'd already reported that Lyft was telling investors that they were oversubscribed, that at that original price range, there was plenty of appetite. And so it sort of follows then if you have too many people at the lower price, you raise the price and sort of squeeze some of them out and get a little bit more money out of them. So sort of moving that price range up, good news for Lyft, certainly.
So, in your conversations with investors, have they expressed concerns about the revenue situation and the fact that they're losing almost half as much money as they're making?
It's clearly a momentum story. Revenue doubling is the focus. The $911 million annual loss last year has been sort of less of the focus. You'll hear people talk about sort of Amazon, a company that famously lost a lot of money at one point. But, it's a company that's gained a lot of market share, is sort of eaten into Uber's position in the United States. And sort of, I think there's hope that the U.S. will rationalize. But certainly it's sort of a risk to bet on a company that loses so much money and says in its prospectus that it may never make money.
Now, of course, these things can be controlled. The price can be controlled. The number of shares can be controlled. Do you think that Uber is watching every step Lyft is taking here and taking note for its own IPO, potentially in a matter of weeks?
Uber is definitely at this point cheering for Lyft. The Uber story is going to be, okay, if Lyft is worth this, we're the leader in the United States. So take whatever Lyft's worth, add that to a food delivery business, add that to a logistics business, add that to our autonomous project. And you sort of you have that all together. And that's the value of Uber, obviously also international. So a good valuation for Lyft is great for Uber, and the calculations that people will do will be pretty obvious, just trying to figure out their favorite market share estimate, giving some advantage probably to being the leader because you can take sort of more money from being the leader, and then coming up with a valuation for Uber's U.S. ride-sharing business. So it's only good news for Uber there.
So at $72 a share, which would be the high end of the range, that puts Lyft above that $23 billion potential market cap we were looking at, right?
To be honest, I'm not going to commit to the exact calculation. There's also this technical distinction between sort of the shares trading and then the valuation, which also will include all these RSUs and dilution that's not happening. So translating this very new share price to its exact valuation and market cap, I don't have the answer right off the top of my head.
All right, Eric Newcomer, I appreciate you being careful about your math. We don't want to mislead anyone. Thank you so much. Eric Newcomer, going to get back to the road and Lyft. Thank you. Meantime, President Trump met with Google CEO Sundar Pichai in Washington on Wednesday. Pichai was visiting the Capitol to meet with General Joseph Dunford, chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, to talk about the Pentagon's concerns over Google's AI lab in China. Turns out he met with the president as well. President Trump tweeting, just met with Sundar Pichai, president of Google, who is obviously doing quite well. He stated strongly that he is totally committed to the U.S. military, not the Chinese military. Also dismissed political fairness and various things that Google can't discuss, political fairness and various things that Google can do for our country. meeting ended very well. Of course, Sundar Pichai is the CEO of Google, not the president of Google. To discuss, we've got Bloomberg's Ben Brody in Washington, who covers tech influence in D.C., and here in the studio, Bloomberg Tech's Mark Bergen, who covers Alphabet, so not quite calling him Sundar Google like he did Tim Apple. But, what do you make of this face-to-face with the president that happened kind of unexpectedly? Pretty
impromptu. I mean, given that it's unclear, Google hasn't told us if they were expecting this or not, but seeing as the president did mislabel him or giving him a promotion or demotion, depending on how you look at it, it didn't seem like it was something that was well choreographed. This is a really sensitive issue here, obviously political, something that Google's been dealing with, especially since this summer when the reports came out about their big effort around Dragonfly, the search engine in China. And of course, that followed them pulling back from a military contract. So you had a lot of Republicans and the president accusing them of hypocrisy, of not being willing to work with the U.S. military and yet proceeding with plans in China. I mean, the bigger issue here is that this is part of Google's large cloud push, right? This is their next venture in sales growth after advertising. Their two biggest competitors, Amazon and Microsoft, are both working with the U.S. military and both have cloud businesses and operations in China.
And both the Pentagon and the Chinese military could be potential customers for Google's cloud business, depending on what Google decides. Ben, walk us through some of the nuances here, Ben, because the president has in the past accused Google of favoring the Chinese military over the U.S. military.
Absolutely. Well, I think one of the things that's important to understand is Trump loves the C-suite. The higher up of the person that he can meet with, the better. And so I'm not so surprised. There was a meeting that Sundar Pichai was supposed to attend back in the fall at the White House that Trump actually sort of delved into. But in terms of some of that quote-unquote political fairness stuff that the president has talked about, a lot of the people I'm talking about has said that a lot of the recent accusations that have bubbled up now and had bubbled up in the fall, that's kind of a way to get the base out. But what they're increasingly worried about is that you're going to see action on something here in Washington, maybe in 6 months, maybe in a year, and that it might go after something like that sort of platform immunity that people like Google and Facebook really enjoy, where they can post something, or users can post something on a place like YouTube and aren't responsible for it. So those are some of the nuances that I think people are looking at here.
Google's statement after this meeting saying, "We were pleased to have productive conversations with the president about investing in the future of the American workforce, the growth of emerging technologies, and our ongoing commitment to working with the U.S. government." I do want to talk a little bit more, though, about the meeting with General Dunford, because Google has pulled out of some work with the Pentagon and has opened an AI lab in China, which was really one of the focuses of General Dunford's conversation, correct?
Yeah, it seemed to be. I mean, I think what's happening behind the scenes, at least for people we talk to, is that the DoD has been worried for a while. They've been talking about this arms race with China around AI, and whether or not you agree with that, certainly the Pentagon wants to have the best tech. They're seeing China and Russia invest deeply in this. Dunford's comments also talked a lot about Russia. Google has spent the past decade telling the world that they have the best AI. And then the clear signal here is that they retreated from the Project Maven contract. They weren't in JEDI, which was this big $10 billion defense contract. It's not clear if they're bidding for more work in the military. So it's a lot of it is signaling here. It'll be interesting to see, if Google tries to accelerate and bid for more of these contracts that are opening up as the DoD moves to cloud computing and AI, or if they continue to retreat.
General Dunford, Ben, has said it is not about Google, but looking at second and third order effects of U.S. business ventures in China, which I suppose it is a point if you're concerned about the U.S.'s position in the AI race vis-a-vis China.
Right, exactly. I think that this has sometimes been described as a culture clash, liberal Silicon Valley versus sort of the conservative military. But I think what people like General Dunford and the military are more looking at here is this larger trend of trying to understand how do we look at these innovative companies. They're headquartered here in the U.S., but really they are global companies, and that's how they have to structure themselves. That's how they have to pursue their opportunities, and how exactly should the U.S. be dealing with these U.S.-based companies, but that aren't really quite American companies. We can't quite call them that, and we can't quite ask them to pursue business in a way that exports American values when there is so much opportunity to be had in China. And so I think that what Dunford is saying there when he says that it's not really about Google is that he is looking at a much broader way at what it means to be having an innovative military that at the same time tries to keep some of those things out of Chinese hands while leveraging commercial tech.
Meantime, Mark, The Intercept is reporting another story about Google's efforts in China. They continue to report that Google executives are carrying out secret work, a secret internal assessment of launching a search engine in China. Google has repeatedly denied this. They have another statement out today saying this speculation is inaccurate. As we've said for many months, we have no plans to launch search in China. There is no work being undertaken on such a project. Team members have moved on to new projects. What's true here?
It is really clear, and I think the Intercept story did a good job of their central point here is that Google's not being transparent with its entire employee base. I think
is that what you believe?
I think that's fair to say. I mean, I think that Google has made a decision. In the years past, they were sort of had like this radical transparency inside the company. This has been a bit of an inflection point where they've decided not to tell their 80,000 plus employees every single decision they're making, certainly around sensitive issues like the military and China. I think what's happening here is what in my reporting from earlier about China, Google sees this trend, which everyone else in tech is seeing, that China, if you look at WeChat, if you look at some of the innovation coming out of China, they are pushing past U.S. in many respects. It is, like Ben said, a huge market. Google has been thinking about this for years. When I talk to people that have spent a lot of time in the company, they say, Google thinks in the long term. And even if they're not going to launch a search engine this year or next year, they are thinking about what are we going to do in China 10, 20 years from now.
Google says in this statement, there is no work being undertaken on such a project. Is that a lie?
I don't know. From what I understand, I'm not sure. I know that they're thinking a lot. My point is that they're thinking a lot about they're thinking a lot about China, and Google is a search company. So they're not giving up on China. I think the Dragonfly and the iteration that they were working on in the years, that might be dead, but certainly not Google's efforts in China.
All right, Bloomberg's Mark Bergen and Ben Brody will continue that reporting for us. Thank you both. All right, Boeing says it was very close to a software fix for its 737 MAX jetliner when an Ethiopian Airlines jet crashed on March 10th. The plane maker has spent months working with regulators and refining the plane software. Flight data from the October crash of a Lion Air jet in Indonesia showed the system had repeatedly tipped the nose down before pilots lost control. A Boeing executive said the upgrade proved more complicated than the manufacturer initially estimated. Coming up, Facebook is attempting to crack down on white nationalism, how the social media giant wants to curb racism on its platforms. Next. And if you like Bloomberg News, you can check us out on the radio, listen on the Bloomberg app, Bloomberg.com, and in the U.S. on SiriusXM. Facebook has taken a hard line on posts relating to white supremacy, but now it is applying the same approach to white nationalism, or attempting to. In a blog post Wednesday, the social media giant announced that it is banning expressions of white nationalism and separatism on its platform starting next week. After an investigation by tech publication Motherboard and conversations with civil rights groups, it said it concluded that the concepts cannot be meaningfully separated from white supremacy and organized hate groups. Joining us to discuss, Bloomberg's Selena Wang. So what is Facebook doing differently here?
So this is actually a pretty major policy shift for Facebook, and activists have been calling for them to make this change for a long time. So Facebook for a long time has banned white supremacy, but they haven't banned white nationalism and white separatism. The argument on Facebook's part was that these are a little bit different, and that white nationalism and separatism are part of the broader concepts of nationalism, like American pride, which is a key part of people's identity. However, when it was reported in Motherboard that this is how Facebook views these issues, there was a huge uproar of criticism. Experts said that these other terms, nationalism and separatism, are really just euphemisms for white supremacy and that they're really all one and the same. So now, after months of talking to civil rights groups, experts, advocacy groups, Facebook has come to the conclusion that they're right. So they're now banning all of these different ideological terms.
Why would it take so long to come to that conclusion?
That's a great question, and many groups are saying that we're glad Facebook is finally taking the action, but it's very late. This is more than, a year after many of these tragic events such as the Charlottesville rally, as well as the recent New Zealand shootings, which was actually live streamed on the Facebook platform. And time and again, we've seen these social media platforms create great policies that are stricter than before. But a policy is only as good as its enforcement mechanism. So we have yet to see how they're going to improve their enforcement mechanisms. And in this blog post, Facebook's executives admit that they need to get better and faster at finding this type of content.
Well, and how successful has Facebook been up to this point on cracking down on white supremacy anyway? I mean, many civil rights groups, the NAACP has complained that Facebook still doesn't do this nearly well enough.
Right. Well, we know just from the New Zealand tragedy earlier this month that remained on for quite some time, and it was reshared across many social media platforms before it was really clamped down on the Facebook platform. Now, something that I think is really interesting with this policy is that not only are they banning white nationalism and white separatism, if someone posts or searches something related to this topic, they'll automatically be redirected to a nonprofit group that tries to get people to leave these hateful groups. And this advocacy group nonprofit group was founded by a group of extremists that then changed their behavior.
Are civil rights groups happy with these changes, or optimistic about these changes?
Well, we've seen statements from several of them that this is a really great move and that other platforms like Twitter and YouTube should immediately implement these stricter policies. Now, Twitter, for one, has never called out these groups in specific, but they did upgrade their policies at the end of 2017 to include a ban against groups that conduct this sort of conduct and that you cannot be affiliated with a group that uses violence to further their causes.
Meantime, these aren't the only hateful issues on Facebook. I mean, what about everything else?
I mean, this is the key question. I mean, the idea of abusive, hateful, misinformation, this is what has been the core issue that all of these services have been dealing with since the beginning of time. And the key question is, how do they balance proactively getting rid of this content while also maintaining free speech on their platform? Now, this change is going to be controversial among politicians who have been on the right, have been criticizing these platforms for having an anti-conservative bias. So certainly there will be people who will look at this policy and think that it is infringing on free speech. But these advocacy groups are optimistic that this is at least a step in the right direction, although it is coming rather late.
So, what is next? I mean, Facebook has talked about using technology plus human resources. We saw that breakdown in the New Zealand shooting where the technology and the human resources didn't work. Is Facebook hiring more people? Are they trying to improve the technology?
Well, we know that they're going to be applying some sort of mishmash of what they've been doing before, which is using their computer systems and algorithms to basically proactively find this information, as well as when content is flagged to Facebook, it will go to one of its more than 15,000 content moderators who will then review that piece of information. If it is violating a policy, they will remove that content. Now, like I said before, they understand that they need to get better and faster at this. The core issue is that these manipulators are always able to move faster than Facebook is able to react. So the question is, how can they get better at that?
All right, Bloomberg's Selena Wang, thank you so much for bringing us that update. Facebook clearly has a lot of work to do. All right, Apple is opening its video app to other platforms, but Google's Android is notably missing. We're going to talk about the latest in the patent infringement saga next. And Bloomberg Tech live streaming on Twitter. You can check us out at Technology and follow our global breaking news network, TikTok, on Twitter. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back to Bloomberg Tech. We've got some breaking news now out of the UK. The results of the latest vote on changing on the regulation changing Brexit Day are in. As expected, MPs support it by a margin of 441 to 105. That is no surprise. We are awaiting results on the second vote. UK Parliament has been voting on 8 Brexit alternatives. These are non-binding, but a way to gauge sentiment. So we're waiting for those votes to come in, and we will bring you them when we get them. Meantime, Apple debuted a slew of new services Monday, including its updated TV app with a new video streaming service. It is also opening these services to other platforms, including devices from Amazon, Roku, and Samsung, but still not Android. Apple Music remains the only major Apple service supported by Android, despite it powering 85% of smartphones. Android, that is. Joining us to discuss from LA, Bloomberg Tech's Mark Gurman. So, Mark, is it at all surprising that Apple has decided to open to any of these other device makers and not Android?
It's surprising in one respect and unsurprising in the other. First, it's surprising because Apple is now positioning itself as a services company, and traditionally when companies have done this, like if you were Google, Amazon, or Microsoft, is you want to get your software and services on every device platform possible. And Google obviously has 85% of the smartphone operating system market globally with 85%. And so Apple holding out from that for its new video service is surprising. On the other hand, if you look at the metrics as to where people watch their video, you take a look at Netflix's data from last year, and they are saying 70% of people watch their video on TVs. And so what Apple's gone ahead and done is it struck deals with all the major market shareholders for TV environments, whether that's Roku, Amazon Fire TV itself, and devices from Sony and LG and Vizio. So from that respect, it is not surprising and both surprising.
Now, are any of the other Apple services that Apple unveiled on Monday going to be available on non-Apple devices? Apple News, Apple Arcade?
Yeah, that's a good question. So from the looks of things right now, it appears those are all going to be Apple exclusive. Apple News, I don't know how well that would do on other platforms, given it would not be pre-installed. I think the major benefit here for Apple News Plus, that $10 a month magazines and news service, is that it is pre-built in. Apple is able to promote it to new iPhone buyers. They can market it as much as they want. People will know it's there every time they open up their phone, whereas obviously it's not going to be pre-installed on Android. And the question is, how many people are really going to subscribe to this service if it's not being pushed to your eyes on a non-Apple device?
What about Apple Card? I mean, presumably anyone could use that. It has benefits tied to Apple Pay, but do you need to be an Apple device user to use it? We've got 30 seconds.
That's a good question. I would say you would have to be an Apple device user unless they opened up a website to apply for it, because right now you need the Apple Pay app, which is exclusive to iPhones, to sign up and register and order that physical card.
All right. Well, I know you'll be continuing to follow that for us, Bloomberg Tech's Mark Gurman. Appreciate the update. Coming up, Salesforce gets hit with a lawsuit filed by 50 different women claiming the company helped sex trafficking on the now defunct Backpage.com. We have all the details for you next. This is Bloomberg. Technology. I'm Emily Chang in San Francisco. Salesforce is being accused of profiting off online ads for sex workers. 50 women saying the company knowingly supported the now defunct Backpage.com web portal. A lawsuit claims Salesforce provided customized database tools meant to promote prostitution. The women describe themselves as survivors of sex trafficking. Joining us to discuss, our Bloomberg legal reporter, Carter Gay-Marotra. Also with us, Bloomberg Tech's Nico Grant, who covers Salesforce. So, Carter, first of all, what are these women accusing Salesforce of doing here?
They're saying that Salesforce, since 2013, has been providing technology and software to Backpage to help them rejuvenate their business. And that effectively was to help them attract new users, to get Johns and traffickers to come back to their site to traffic, to purchase women for sex slavery. And they are 50 of those women who are claiming that they have evidence that not only was this happening, but Salesforce was doing it knowingly. They were customizing their tools for Backpage to promote their business.
Now, Salesforce, in a statement to us, said we are deeply committed to the ethical and humane use of our products and take these allegations seriously. However, we don't comment on pending litigation. I, in research for my book, actually worked with the San Francisco Police Department, and they walked me through Backpage, very detailed walkthrough, and it was very clear that there was illegal stuff happening there and things that were not good for women and not good for children. So, Nico, how does Salesforce defend itself here?
Right. So first, for those who don't know, Salesforce makes tools that help companies either get new customers or hold on to existing ones. It's able to track information that a company has about its customers and market to them, things of that nature. As of 2008, it was clear that there was scrutiny about Backpage.com, and there were allegations that it was being used for trafficking. It was a full 5 years later when Salesforce began a relationship with the company. And what's interesting about the timing is that simultaneously, Salesforce was, as a company, and Mark Benioff was, as an individual, talking about the importance of combating human trafficking. It was something that Salesforce.org, the philanthropic arm, highlighted. Nonprofit groups at the front line, Salesforce as a company, said that its technology and technology in general could be used against it. And the most recent billing statement that we saw in this lawsuit claim shows that the company had a relationship in December 2016, and that contract would have gone until December 2018, only a few months ago. And so, if Backpage wasn't shut down a year ago, it's unclear if Salesforce would have stopped doing business.
So, Kartike, what are these attorneys for these women? What would they have to prove that there was some sort of nefarious behavior by Salesforce?
They'd have to show that not only did Salesforce have a relationship with Backpage, but that the trafficking was supported by these contracts, and that Salesforce knew exactly what they were getting into when they signed these agreements. When they were customizing tools for Salesforce, they had to know quite explicitly that retaining customers meant retaining Johns, retaining traffickers.
How could you not know that about Backpage?
And that is exactly
everybody knows that about Backpage.
No, I think you nailed it. That's exactly what the plaintiff's attorney is saying. How could they not know? Congress was investigating Backpage. 47 state AGs had come out and said, Backpage needs to be shut down now. And when California issued its release on Backpage, they said that more than 90% of Backpage's revenue was coming from sex trafficking. So it's how it's possible that they didn't know will be very difficult for them to defend in court.
Well, I think that Salesforce, for Salesforce, this could be a situation in which the left hand wasn't talking to the right. I mean, I know from some of the sources that I've spoken to about Salesforce that there is a lot of pressure in the sales organization. It's a company that, projects a warm and very progressive image in terms of its corporate values. But, ultimately it's a $13 billion business that has grown by putting a lot of pressure on sales reps to either, start new deals with companies or to expand existing deals each quarter. And so, Salesforce may be arguing that ultimately they didn't know what was happening here, but it comes in the context of another example when Salesforce did business with an organization that ended up being controversial.
Right, didn't they do immigration? Wasn't there business around
Exactly. So last summer we reported that Salesforce had a contract with Customs and Border Protection, which Salesforce had said was the case, but more specifically, employees within Salesforce were really upset when they were thinking about this contract. They all signed this letter to Mark Benioff, more than 650 people, saying, please reconsider this contract. At the time, the Trump administration was apprehending families that were crossing the U.S.-Mexico border and separating them. And Salesforce employees felt like the company's, values said that this isn't something they should be even remotely close to. Benioff in that case decided to keep the relationship, but did hire an executive to pay attention to these types of deals going forward.
Well, and this is something that we're talking about more broadly with other tech companies, like Google's relationship with the military and pulling out of work with the Pentagon. And some employees are happy about that, and some employees aren't happy about that. There's internal pressure. There is external pressure. But Cardigan, what makes the fact that this is involving sex trafficking different? I mean, this isn't just another business that Salesforce decided to give software tools to, right?
Right. I think that's the bottom line. And I think what plaintiffs are getting at here, this isn't their only case. They've sued Facebook in different courts over sex trafficking as well. So the distinction that needs to be made here is, are these companies able to, while they have this philanthropic side, able to draw a line between profit and social responsibility? And I think the attorney even concedes that Salesforce has its priorities right, broadly speaking. They don't support sex trafficking. That's not the allegation. But does the left hand know what the right hand's doing, as Nico was saying?
Have those other cases succeeded against Facebook?
They're being litigated in state courts between Ohio, Texas, and possibly California right now. They haven't been litigated through and through.
So, we have this statement from Salesforce. Nico, what are your sources telling you about how this is being received internally, especially given, Mark Benioff is out there talking about how Facebook is the new cigarettes, and it's very important to be, sort of mission-driven, socially conscious CEO. I mean, he's out on the streets campaigning for housing bills. What's happening inside the company?
Yeah, so Salesforce right now, this is not landing well within the company. It wasn't landing well in the communications department. And I think that there really are going to be serious questions asked of the company at this point, because, and particularly I think the question is, what will the controls be? It's one thing for the company to have a philanthropic arm, for Mark to care about philanthropy and certain public causes, but it's another thing for it to be clear across the organization, including to the sales team, be careful who you do business with. Tech companies can argue that these are just tools that we're providing. If someone is using our tools maliciously, we don't have culpability. And I think that we've seen in recent years that line move sort of closer and closer and closer to tech companies having culpability, which led to, the shutdown of Backpage.com in the first place.
Cardigan, what's next? How long is it going to take for this case to play out?
That's a good question. The company will probably respond in court in the next 45 to 60 days. There'll probably be a motion to dismiss. We'll get into the legal wrangling of this. It'll take time. Not something that's going to go to trial this year. So next year, possibly, we'll finally see a resolution.
Okay. Well, you will both keep us honest. Thank you so much, Cardigan Mehrotra and Nico Grant for Bloomberg. Thank you. All right, coming up, Kickstarter hoping to become the industry standard for technology by allowing employees to unionize. But will big tech follow? We'll discuss next. This is Bloomberg. Breaking news out of London. UK Parliament has filed back into the building. Parliament voting against a no-deal Brexit. They've been voting on 8 different alternatives to Brexit. This, of course, on the back of Prime Minister Theresa May saying she would resign if they voted for her deal. I want to bring in our Caroline Hyde, who's been following all of this from New York. Caroline, what's at stake right now?
What's at stake is how long Brexit might take, what options there are left on the table, and when we might see the resignation of the Prime Minister Theresa May. John Bercow, the Speaker, currently saying that the UK Parliament has rejected a Norway-style Brexit option. Basically, there are 8 different options being debated and voted on non-binding votes, I might add. This is all done on pieces of paper. They're known as indicative votes. And we're finding out slowly but surely what, if any, can garner some sort of majority in the House of Commons instead of Prime Minister May's own withdrawal agreement, which slowly but surely she's been building a little bit of momentum on. She's had Boris Johnson, her former Foreign Secretary, saying he'd back it. However, the all-important DUP, the Irish part of that props up her government, the DUP party, saying they would reject her withdrawal agreement. So when we look at these options, the UK Parliament has rejected Labour's so-called soft Brexit proposal. They've also rejected an emergency break to stop a no-deal Brexit. Basically, at the moment, they're rejecting everything. This is exactly what Oliver Letwin, who proposed this idea, wanted. He wanted everything to show that there was no majority in Parliament, and therefore they must back Prime Minister Theresa May's withdrawal agreement. The question is whether this man speaking now, John Bercow, would allow it back for a third vote. The UK Parliament has rejected a referendum on the Brexit deal. That's important because we were wondering whether there would be a second referendum. That's what millions have been marching over in the UK and London over the course of the weekend. The UK Parliament rejects the Malthouse proposal on Brexit. These are all intricately worded types of votes, but generally speaking, we can see that there's no majority for any Brexit options. So does this mean, therefore, Prime Minister May's own withdrawal agreement will be allowed to come back to the House, be voted on Friday, be accepted, and will we therefore see her exit come May the 22nd and finally the UK leave the EU? Emily.
Right, and the deadline to vote on Theresa May's deal is this Friday. So the question is, will that vote happen? Will that vote happen in time? I want to bring in Guy Johnson. As Caroline mentioned, it seems like Parliament is rejecting everything here. So where does that leave the UK?
In a very tricky place, unfortunately, Emily, because we've also seen the DUP coming out this evening saying that it will not back Theresa May's deal, which effectively scuppers Theresa May's deal. So everything has been rejected effectively this evening, including Theresa May's deal. She simply doesn't have the numbers to get it across the line. So everything has been rejected, as Caroline was suggesting. Maybe this is what Mr. Letwin was hoping for in order to basically prove that Theresa May's deal should have a chance. But without the DUP, it simply doesn't. It's going to be interesting to see how we proceed from here. The idea was that we would then circle back. We would bring some of the ideas that have been more well received back on Monday, but it seems at this point in time that everything has been rejected. It'll be interesting to work our way through the mathematics of it all to see who's abstained, who has not abstained, who's voted for what, but the idea was that we would be back on Monday to get an idea of what would work. At the moment, we're still in the position where nobody within the House of Commons is prepared to vote for anything, but they are prepared to vote against anything. So thus far, this process is not yielding results, Emily.
Guy Johnson standing by for us at Westminster. Guy, you know, it seems the one thing they can agree on is they don't want to leave without a deal, but they can't agree on what that deal looks like or whether to even vote on the deal again. Do you think that this deal, Prime Minister May's deal, will be voted on by Friday, which is the EU deadline?
I think it's... Well, there's a number of things that stand against it. At the moment, as you've indicated, the Speaker of the House has made it very difficult for Theresa May to bring that deal back to the House of Commons without significant changes. Now, there's ways she could get round that if she was so minded. However, to make her so minded, she would have to believe that she has the numbers to make it happen. The meeting of the ERG, the Hardline Brexit Caucus that took place a little bit earlier this evening, did generate some good news for her, i.e. some of the big beasts like Boris Johnson of the UK political world said that they would back Theresa May's deal. I just wonder whether there'll be some backtracking as a result of the fact that the DUP will not back the deal from him. But nevertheless, some of the sort of the heavyweight Brexiteers have said that they would back her. But without the DUP, Emily, the Northern Irish Unionist Party, which props up Theresa May's government, Theresa May is going to find it incredibly difficult to get her deal across the line. She's tried twice. I think she will find it very difficult at this point in time, unless something significantly changes, to get that done. If we don't get it done by Friday, it looks like we are heading for a long Brexit extension at this stage. But in theory, we could also have more indicative votes early on next week. But at this point, Theresa May is definitely going to struggle. The maths looks like it's against her.
So the Prime Minister is certainly still in a very difficult position, Caroline, and yet conservative Brexiteers over the last several days seem to have been turning back towards her. What is the fact, or how does her agreement to resign when Brexit happens, how does that change opinion?
It changed opinion because it brings some key critical voices perhaps back towards her side, seeing an option to potentially take her role, become Prime Minister. We know that that's what Boris Johnson, her former Foreign Secretary, the man who was London Mayor for a long time, who made his fame by pushing for Brexit. He, many debate, but many feel that he would really rather like the role of Prime Minister, and that's why he was willing to back her deal as long as she then takes the exit. They feel that they could then, once they take that decision, basically renegotiate it with the EU, with a new Prime Minister in place, get a new kind of agreement on the table when someone else takes the helm, a better negotiator in their point of view. So this is why certain Brexiteers have liked the fact that Theresa May is willing to hang up her cap and call it quits once she has so-called finished the deal, found a divorce deal, and hand over the reins of power to someone else. And the moment the British pound is sinking on the fact that we can have no sort of majority in the United Kingdom members of Parliament, clearly cannot find any sort of clear path for a Brexit. And this, I think, just reflects the mood of the whole country, Emily. It divides the country and families and friends in so many different ways. No wonder, therefore, the elected people that represent them cannot find any sort of majority either.
Right, Caroline, UK Parliament, you are looking at live shots right now. The vote showing no majority for any of these Brexit options. On the table are Caroline Hyde in New York, Guy Johnson in London, continuing to follow this story for us, and certainly indicative of the gridlock among the British people as well. There, we'll be back with more of Bloomberg Technology after this quick break.
Is a discrete process. It is the first time it has been conducted. It was approved by the House, and therefore my understanding, no, I'm not debating the issue with the right.
Just last week, employees at Kickstarter announced plans to unionize. It is the first major step towards allowing white-collar tech workers to improve current working environments in Silicon Valley. Kickstarter says the move is a pivotal moment for tech and hopes to set the standard for the entire industry. Joining us to discuss, Candace Z, shareholder at Vetter Price. Candace is a member of the Labor and Employment Practice Area in the firm's LA office. So Candace, what exactly do you think is happening here?
I think what you're really seeing is a maturing and some of the growing pains of the tech industry. Companies that were once startup companies now are Fortune 500 companies with hundreds, if not thousands, of employees. And you see some employees beginning to feel, a little bit more marginalized, or not, like they don't have a voice in their workspace.
What do you make of the fact that the first tech company that's attempting to do this is Kickstarter? It's not Google or Facebook. Why Kickstarter?
I don't know the reasons behind the reason why they're unionizing. I've seen some of the memos, but it looks like, employees are looking to have a voice. And I think the real question is, what do they want? A union can only do so much. They can help negotiate wages, terms and conditions of employment, benefits. But if they're unhappy about things like the business strategy of the company or where the funding is coming from, that's something that the union cannot really negotiate for them. That's something that they won't have a seat at the table for.
Unionization efforts among white-collar tech companies is rare, as we've discussed. Why is that?
I think because, the National Labor Relations Act is really a 20th century statute that is trying to be applied to a 21st century business model. It was enacted, back in the 1930s to help low-paid workers and to help their working conditions. Now you have companies that have campuses with free food and free lunches. So it's a little bit different now, and it'll be interesting to see how the law applies to this new kind of model.
Meantime, there are some executives within the company who are reportedly arguing against unionization. I assume that is not uncommon for there to be disagreement within the same company about whether or not to do this. How does that generally play out?
It's not uncommon, and it plays out in the sense that, I think companies and executives, they want the chance to correct whatever is employees are seeing is wrong. They want to make things right, and they want a chance to see what the problems are, why the employees are unhappy, and rectify that situation before a union might come in and negotiate on behalf of the employees individually.
Do you think this will become a trend? Will we see other tech companies doing this?
I think the industry is really going to be looking closely at what happens with the Kickstarter unionization drive. They're going to want to know why the union why the employees are trying to unionize, and if they do unionize, what the employees are going to be asking for. Are they asking for better wages, or are they asking for other things such as, what products are being marketed, what business strategy, or who sits in management? Again, those are things that a union might not resolve for employees.
Right, and that was my next question is, in general, when this happens, are the employees who unionize happy with the result? Do they feel that life is better than it was before?
I think it really depends on the employee that you ask. Some employees prefer a union negotiating on their behalf. Others who might want to exceed more on performance and merit rather than on seniority, they might be frustrated that they can't succeed as quickly based on their merit as opposed to seniority.
Okay, Candace Vetter-Price, thank you so much for joining us. It's a fascinating subject we're going to continue to follow.
Thank you.
Meantime, a sleepy start to U.S. IPOs is about to get a good bounce. Lyft just out, raising the price range of its IPO set for Thursday, adding to what is set to be the biggest listing of the year so far. That, of course, is expected to be followed by Uber, perhaps even Airbnb later this year. Bill Ford, CEO of the private equity firm General Atlantic, says it is the most exciting IPO year since 2012, and sat down with our own Jason Kelly to talk about the 2019 pipeline and Amazon's New York City reversal.
I think 2019 is setting up to be the most exciting IPO year since 2012 for a couple of reasons. You've got some wonderful companies, one, Uber, Lyft, and maybe down the road Airbnb, are going to introduce investors to the sharing economy and the very, very large rideshare market. And then on the enterprise software space, you've got Palantir, CrowdStrike, Slack, all highly anticipated next-generation software companies. You got to go all the way back, I think, to 2012 when Facebook went public and introduced investors to the social media space. And also, we had that great crop of cloud software companies, Workday, ServiceNow, Palo Alto Networks. So it's setting up to be a great year. The other thing about the IPO market that we've observed over the years is that when you have a very constructive equity market like we've had over the last several months, combined with moderate volatility, a VIX of 15, the market's not too hot, not too cold, really creates the best conditions for a good IPO market, and we have them now. We've seen the Levi Strauss deal work. I think Lyft will be successful, and I think it sets up a nice conditions for the balance of the year.
General Atlantic CEO Bill Ford with our own Jason Kelly will be following Lyft, of course, every step of the way. And that does it for this edition of Bloomberg Technology. As always, we're live streaming on Twitter. You can check us out at Technology and follow our global breaking news network, TikTok, on Twitter. This is Bloomberg.